some Eagles stuff, as of course we always do, but we'll get John's take to start things off because we can kind of tie the Eagles in here. If anybody out there had any glimmer of hope, that one Antonio Brown would miraculously be wearing the midnight green, do you believe today has ended all possibilities that AB appears in the NFL again?
You never say never in this league, but the Eagles were never interested in Antonio Brown. We're not going to be interested in Antonio Brown. So, I mean, I get it from a performance standpoint. The guy has been tremendous for a very long time, and I have an issue with the receiver position. But anybody who's been around this team and for more than 5 minutes knows they don't want certain personalities in the locker room. It was never an issue. It was never going to be discussed. They were not going to bring that type of guy into the NovaCare complex. It's as simple as that. And that was before today.
Do you think that he plays anywhere else? Forget Philadelphia. Do you anticipate no, two questions. Does he play this year? Does he start fresh and play next year?
Well, it's kind of tough. Obviously, he's got the civil suit against him, and that's not a criminal case. So it's kind of in uncharted waters from the NFL standpoint. I said from when it happened, because, you have this society on social media that likes to be the judge, jury, and executioner without information. And from the league's perspective, they're concerned about their reputation. But I always thought it was a slippery slope if you were going to place somebody on the commissioner's exempt list, which is essentially putting them on ice for a civil action, because it's one-sided. As I said, it's not a criminal complaint. You can essentially lie if you like in a civil suit. So it's a slippery slope, Pandora's box, all that. I never thought the NFL wanted to go down there, but Antonio makes things difficult because of the other things he does. And a perfect example of today, going on social media saying some of the things he did, it's very difficult for the NFL to bring him back, and it's very difficult for any organization to bring him back this year. So my guess would be if he wants to play, he's going to have to wait till next year.
Dez Bryant says, give me 2 weeks, and then I want to help somebody out. Not a starter, just give me 2 weeks. I want to contribute. Any interest?
No. No. The guy hasn't played in 2 years. And when he did play 2 years ago, he wasn't very good. And we've talked about Dez a lot. At one time, he was a top 5 receiver in this league. He was never the same physically after the Jones fracture in his foot because of what he was as a receiver. He wasn't a technician. He wasn't a great route runner. He just was a phenomenal athlete at his size. And once he lost that explosion, he wasn't a very good receiver. So just because somebody has the name doesn't mean you're getting an all-pro. The Eagles made their decision, and that's Jordan Matthews, and they made it, and that's who they're bringing in for the rest of the season. So you can forget about Antonio. You can forget about Dez Bryant. There's no interest.
All right, Johnny Mac. So they're going to go with what they got, right? I mean, Jordan Matthews is going to be the guy. They're going to. So for anybody out there who thinks that something miraculous is going to happen between now and the end of the bye week here and going to next week, this is the team right here for the stretch run, correct?
Yeah. I mean, if somebody else gets hurt, you have to visit something else, but it still wouldn't be those guys. So, I mean, people have to get over the big name thing. And, just because the names are familiar doesn't mean they're the best options. And Antonio's a little bit different because obviously he can still play, but there's just too many issues there. So, I mean, that's just pie in the sky stuff. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, so this is it. This is the crew, like Mike said, moving forward. And the bye week is here, so Eagles have some time to regroup, go back to the drawing board, get some days off, get a little bit healthier. 1 week doesn't do too much, but it does help. So what players are you looking at, John, to have a bigger impact when the team returns from the bye? Who's played out of their shoes? Who's been a little bit disappointing? Well, what can you expect when it's time to lace them up for the Patriots and the rest of the season?
Well, offensively, it starts at receiver, and you need more from Alshon Jeffrey, and you need more from Nelson Aguilar. It's as simple as that. And, you can talk about guys not being, in Nelson's case, not being a very good receiver over the years, which is true, but he's not been this bad. So if you can get back to where you were before, in Alshon Jeffrey's case, that was a pretty high-level receiver. I never thought he was the number one in this league, but a high-level number two type receiver. Can those guys get back to that? If they do, this offense will get a lot better. I think defensively, what you can take most out of the 2-win streak into the bye is, Fletcher Cox is clearly close to being his self again after coming back from the injury. And we talked a lot at the cornerback position, back-to-back-to-back weeks, getting Jalen Mills first, then Ronald Darby, then Avonte Maddox. They've at least calmed down that situation, which was really, really bad early in the season.
Yeah, and you look at the offense, and one standout, one consistent piece there has been Jordan Howard, and he has 7 total touchdowns through 9 games. So what can we expect? More of the same from him? We've talked about Miles Sanders maybe seeing the field a little bit more, not taking away carries from Jordan, but figuring out a way to get him on the field. Does Jordan's workload amp up a little bit? Does it stay the same? What can we expect there?
Well, you can expect similar to what you always get from Doug Peterson. It'll be a week-to-week thing. My biggest concern is Darren Sproles being back and messing up what has turned into a pretty good system with Jordan and Miles together and handling the roles they're each good at. I think you need to turn the page on Darren Sproles, but I guarantee you Doug Peterson does not agree with me. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. And then it becomes week to week and who's hot and who's playing well. And that back will get more touches. More often than not, I mean, as a runner, Jordan Howard's going to perform better. So you figure he would get more touches. And those last 2 games it was 23 rushes in Buffalo, which is the most ever, and then 19. So that's a lot for Doug Peterson. So that tells you how effective Jordan Howard has been.
So with John McMullen, of course, football at 4. The Eagles on the bye week this week, but we got plenty of NFL. As always, we'll get into some Week 10 stuff here. But, real quick, we talked yesterday, they do a lot of self-scouting. They look over things. Do they make any changes? There's really not a spot on this field that you would say, all right, this guy's been struggling, we're going to pull him out, except for, we chronicled the wide receiver spot, the safety, the corners, I guess you could say that's secondary. So how comfortable should the Eagles feel about what they have? We were kind of talking about, all right, here you are, 5-4, you got the stretch run coming. Does this team feel like they are prepped and ready to kind of take off, similar to what they did last year? They were kind of floundering along at this time last year, and then they started to click. Now, some of that click was they changed quarterbacks. That was a big change. This team's not making that change. So does this team feel like that click is almost there?
Yeah, I do, and a lot of it has to do with the schedule. They're getting through the difficult part of the schedule, and the end of the season is the soft part of the schedule. So while you try to compartmentalize and take things week to week and concern yourself on the next opponent, there is a bit of an oasis once you get past Seattle. And 4 of those last 5 games, if you just handle your business, you're going to win them. And then you start talking about Dallas at Lincoln Financial Field, and that's a very good football team. And that's going to be a difficult game, and the Cowboys have had the Eagles' number recently. So by no means am I saying that's a gimme as well, but 4 out of 5 is pretty good. If you just do what you're supposed to do, this team should be in pretty good shape.
Hey, John, I wanted to go talk to you a little bit about the J.J. Arcega-Whiteside deal that we've been talking about all week. And I like what you've said about not judging a guy so early in his career and how it's ridiculous, especially with him not getting on the field. But I wonder if, in your mind, see, there have been some guys, and I think of Jaquan Jarrett, who were so bad that they couldn't get on the field, and that really did foretell a career pretty early. And I just – that's where I'm kind of caught between whether or not he's not getting on the field because he is really not what they thought or because he just doesn't play the position that they thought. And I'm wondering if any of your conversations with people behind the scenes have been able to tell you one way or another.
Yeah, I think it's more the positional thing. I really do. I don't get me wrong. I when JJ was forced into action early in the season, and both Alshon and Deshaun went down in Atlanta, he didn't play well. And obviously, everybody looks to the Detroit game in the 50-50 ball, which is what he's supposed to do well. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a little spin after the fact. People acting like that. You should catch that ball. You should have gave it. Should have came closer, but that's not exactly the easiest catch in the world.
Right.
So I think that's a little bit overrated. But I go back to training camp. I go back to the summer and talking to Mike Rowe and Carson Walsh, and they're just raving about this kid. I find it very hard to believe. And he dominated a lot in training camp. I don't care much about preseason games, and he had the big preseason game, and we've talked about that in the past. But it didn't look like somebody who didn't belong at all. And you get into the regular season, and as you know, Jeff, it becomes game prep mode. There's very little time to teach people things at that point. Jim Schwartz always says off-season is for teaching, training camp's for evaluation, and then you get into game prep mode. So if you're not cross-training, I think that's the mistake. They were cross-training him behind Alshon at the X position and in the slot. So it's not like they just had him there, but they didn't cross-train him at the Z. And once you get to the regular season, you're not going to start there. So I think the problem is from the Eagles' perspective, they should have picked that up quicker and realized that we got to get him ready because Mac is the guy who is just not an NFL-level receiver. So I hear what you're saying. I mean, there's high-level first-round picks. Forget about second-round picks. You just can't play, and you realize it relatively quickly. I don't get the feeling the Eagles believe that. I certainly didn't see that when we did get to see practice all summer. So I think, and I use Brandon Graham as the perfect example. People had him run out on a rail years into his career. Forget about 9 games. Late bloomer, and look at him now. So, yeah, people are silly to give up on him. And I think part of it is the coaching staff that have kind of mishandled this, to be honest.
How about just the idea of, and unfortunately, I'm sure you're getting them too. I'm getting them through Twitter and other questioners, and people have already kind of given up on the year. But the question I commonly get is, how much of an emphasis does this team need, the front office need to put on not just getting younger, but speed, overall speed on both offense at the skill position, but in defense also at maybe in corner and safety. And that's something that I thought last year that they needed to address. They got Sanders, but I do think when they look going to the offseason, that's got to be kind of up there. Guys who can run. We're constantly asking you and the conversations, whether it's cornerback, whether it's receiver, about guys who can run. And the Eagles have a clear lack of that compared to a lot of other teams in the league.
Yeah, I get what people are saying. But, I mean, the one guy who can run at receiver can't play. So it's not just about running.
Yeah.
Nelson can run really well.
Oh, I thought you meant Deshaun. That can't play.
Well, no. I mean, besides Deshaun, obviously Deshaun is injured. The one guy active and healthy who can run, in theory, very well is Nelson Aguilar. So that doesn't make you a good player. People have criticized Ronald Darby a lot, although it's pretty clear he's better than Rasul Douglas and Sidney Jones. He could run, and he could run very well. But, they are aging, and there are certain guys, Malcolm and Rodney, are not high level, certainly speed-wise at the safety position. That's never been Jalen Mills' game. It's never been Alshon's game. So I get it. You'd love to have Tyreek Hill out there, but, for everyone who raves about Tyreek's speed, and you saw him on that 91-yard touchdown, beat the running back and show off that unbelievable speed. Guess what? There have been guys in this league, guys who haven't made this league, that can run just as fast as Tyreek Hill, but they're not good football players. So that's just part of it. I mean, Tyreek is a tremendous receiver. In that same game, he made one of the best catches you're ever going to see. So it's not just he can run; he's also a really good receiver. And I think
hitting on guys that can run, who are good football players in general. That's fair.
Yeah. And then I look at it. There are other ways to win, and that's where the Eagles are with the two tight ends and the 12 personnel, and Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. There are other ways to win. And now that they don't have Deshaun, you got to go. You got to go in that direction. Mac Hollins, by the way, could run at least before the sports hernia for his size. What good is that?
We're talking with John McMullen, and of course, by the way, the Eagles with the bye this week. We know that they'll play New England. Do you remember a time offhand where two teams have played each other off the bye, other than these two teams in the Super Bowl?
Yeah, well, everybody makes a big thing out of the bye week, and for many years, understandably around here, because Andy Reid was so good coming out of the bye week, such a good preparation coach. I look at it more of, and I know the Eagles look at it, it's not about the other team, it's generally about them. And this is a good time for the bye. I mean, this is where you want it. You don't want it too early. You don't want it too late. And this is right almost at the midpoint, 9 games. I think it's good timing. Certainly they have to get Alshon Jeffrey healthy after getting hurt late in the game against Chicago. I think from their standpoint, it's just good timing, and I think that's what this bye is about.
Yeah, well, I know very rarely do you see two teams, though. One team typically has that advantage of, hey, they're coming off their bye week. They had 2 weeks to prepare for you. When the schedule came out and you saw New England, it was like, you got the Patriots. But you got 2 weeks for them. Well, sure enough, they got 2 weeks for you. I found that to be a little bit odd. But let's ask you this, because you've talked a lot about it. We've talked a lot about it. But, Jeff, you brought up the consequences for the officiating in the league. And these challenges and all the stuff, as we are at the bye week, do you think the NFL, is there something that they are looking at or can do, or this just is what it is, the way the officials are affecting these games?
It is what it is. I don't understand.
Do you think they're sitting in a room and understand, man, this is a mess, but we just don't have an answer?
No, because I've been talking about that for years, and I don't understand what they're trying to accomplish. And I talk about it all the time. At the core, it's an entertainment product, and you're trying to entertain the people. And I don't understand the legislation. I talk about that a lot of the game. It's so choppy. The emphasis, the point of emphasis on backside holding, the ticky-tack, whether it's defensive holding calls in the secondary or, interference down the field, illegal contact down the field. It's just an ugly product, and people are addicted to it. And it's not very entertaining, at least from my perspective, at least from what it was. And if you look at the league, I don't know why they want it that way. I don't understand it. People are upset, obviously, by the pass interference, but they should have never enacted that rule.
Right,
That's
it's the owners,
call
right?
down
I
the
mean,
field.
you know it. It's the owners. They don't think practically. They think about their product, their wins and losses, as much as they think about the product. So when you have the influential owners who get quote unquote screwed over by a call, then they want everything changed, and then the competition committee has to meet it. I mean, if John, if you were the commissioner and you told the owners, right, like you got to accept human error, they're all going to kick you out of the room. You know that. I mean, they just don't want to hear that, unfortunately.
Well, you do, I do think you could press the logic aspect of it, and I've said, if you go back to the NFC Championship game and say, just get everybody in that room and say, look around the league and show me this is consistent, where somebody blows something that blatant. Right. And that's when you say to them, it doesn't happen. It's not that big of an issue. It happened at a terrible time. We get all that, and that's where the human error comes into it, and that's unfortunate for New Orleans, but I don't know how you fix that. I tell Mike all the time, what do we do, Jeff? We talk about players in games every week, and what do we talk about? We talk about players making mistakes. Mm-hmm. They make mistakes because they're human beings. They aren't video games. They aren't joysticks. But people expect officials to be perfect? It doesn't make sense to me.
I even brought up the fact that
logically like that.
Yeah, think about how frustrated.
Understand.
Think about how frustrated, because everybody who wants to move into the robot technology and just make everything automated and robots and this and that. Think about how often we get frustrated when computers don't work right, when they glitch, when they freeze, when there's some type of wiring that's wrong that nobody can possibly comprehend because they didn't go to school for IT. That's the generation we'll be living in 50 years from now. We'll be blaming that.
Yeah, no question. I talk about unintended consequences all the time as well, and you see that happen. Nobody thinks 2 steps ahead. They just think, okay, this isn't going to be a problem, and all of a sudden you think you're solving one problem and you create 2 more. It happens all the time in this league, and they do it consistently. And I don't understand why they do it. And the lobster block is a perfect example, and I get a kick out of that because I talked to a bunch of offensive linemen. They never heard that term before, number one. So they made up a term, and it's just backside holding. And the frustration of people getting a 10-yard player, 10-yard penalty, which essentially kills an offensive drive. Mm-hmm. And when the hold isn't even involved, a ticky-tack holding call on the backside isn't even involved in the play. It doesn't make the game entertaining. It doesn't do service to the game, certainly the players. And I don't understand why they even got into a room and said, we got to eliminate this, when it doesn't have an effect on the game. It's mind-blowing to me at times how over-legislated it is. And then when I just talked about unintended consequences, well, this league is now big on, obviously, fantasy football, and they want scoring, and that's what people find entertaining. And what does that do? As I just said, it derails offensive football. Mm-hmm. So you're creating a problem you wanted to solve by making it more difficult to play defense because you want scoring, and now you're taking away from scoring. It's just dumb.
Kevin Seifert at ESPN.com writes, the NFL's officiating crisis, why it's time to sound the alarm. So for everybody out there listening, if you want more, you can check that piece out. Until then, John McMullen, he's going into hibernation until tomorrow's edition of Football at 4. Thanks, John.
All right, thank you, guys.